we were very careful and very, aware that, you're skating an edge between what works, what doesn't work. And for me, when I'm arranging and considering music, outside of the immediate what's good for Paul, what's good for the band, I put myself in position of the listener, the audience. Like, what are they going to get from this? Are they going to hear it? So you never know how people are going to react.
Everybody, it's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to another episode of Around Town. We have two guests today, which is very exciting, and it's an even more exciting project. So we have Jim Galleretto and we have Paul Marinaro. Of course, Jim Galleretto is one of the principals in the Metropolitan Jazz Octet, and they have an incredible new project out called the Bowie Project, featuring Paul Marinaro on vocals. And they have a release show coming up February 10th at Studio 5, 7:30 p.m., studio5.dance for tickets. We'll get into all of that. But guys, I never thought I'd have both of you on to talk about David Bowie. So it's a first. Congratulations, but this is an incredible project. So Jim, why don't we talk about how this whole project sort of got started? Because since it's a Metropolitan Jazz Octet project with Paul, I'm sure you have some insight, and also we'll get way into the arranging and stuff too, because taking a quick listen through it, I mean, hearing the David Bowie tunes done this way is just, it's something very special. So how did this whole project come about?
Well, it sort of was the previous project was with Dee Alexander on our Billie Holiday tribute record, It's Too Hot for Words. And that was such a great experience, just working with Dee, working with her artistry. And I knew that we wanted to do more projects. And we were trying to figure out, what's next, what do we want to do. And I actually had a conversation with one of my associates, John Cornegie, who's one of the lead arrangers in the group. And we were sort of like kind of figuring out what we want to do. And I said, you know what, I haven't heard Paul sing live. So we went out to Hey Nani, actually, and heard him with his quartet, and were blown away. And it kind of set the path on this project. We didn't know it was going to be Bowie or when that was, that took shape gradually over time. But after we heard Paul and just the way he sang and his artistry, we knew we wanted to work with him. So that was the first thing that happened.
Wasn't that something similar to how you actually connected with Dee too? Because it shocked me when you and I talked about that with Dee, that you had never really worked with her before, and
right.
Or played, or however it was. And now the same thing with Paul, where you're probably because you're so consumed because you're working constantly and just like all the musicians. But it's interesting how this keeps happening.
Yeah, well, in a way, it's the commonality is going to hear each of those people sing live. I actually heard Dee at one of the Toys for Tots events at the Green Mill, and we weren't on a stage together because we were alternating slots in that show, but I got to hear her live, and that kind of like as with Paul, just being around that in person. It's one thing to hear somebody on a recording and kind of get what they do and hear the magic there, but it's an entirely different impact when you hear something live. And that inspired me for Dee, and that's kind of what happened with hearing Paul live.
I find it interesting, before we start talking and I bring Paul in, why don't we talk just a little background on Metropolitan Jazz Octet, because it's been the concept and the group has been around since the 50s. And I can remember you and I talking when you first put the first recording out, I think. So talk just a little background on it.
So originally, the Metropolitan Jazz Octet, MJO, started not with me, but it started with one of my mentors and college professors, Tom Hilliard. This was his group. I believe he started it in the early 1950s, and it was comprised of, it was similar to what's happening now. It was comprised of professional musicians who were making their living in music, in companionship with arrangers and orchestrators of his day. So in 1959, Tom had this group. I think he had it for like 20 years or more. And he did a lot of work in Chicago. They recorded, the one album they recorded was on the Argo label, and they recorded that in Chicago in 1959, and it's entitled "The Legend of Bix." So it's a tribute record to Bix Beiderbecke, and that record you can still find it. I think Paul actually found a copy online recently, and it's only an LP, and but it's actually quite beautiful. Even how it was recorded, it's something to get into later on. But I think it's in mono, if I'm not mistaken, and it just sounds beautiful. So Tom, to kind of move the genesis along, I had been friends with Tom after college, and towards the end of his life, we started, kind of rekindled a friendship. I would meet him, and I would go to his house. We'd have lunch together. We would listen to music. Tom was a poet. He was kind of an artist as well. So we would just chat and kind of, just listen to things and enjoy each other's company. And then one day he said, "Hey Jim, I got something for you." I went to his closet. He opened his closet doors, and inside there were two suitcases full of music. And it was his library, Tom's library, that he had worked on for like 25, 30 years. It was 150 songs, charts, ranging from pretty stock approaches to music, all the Bix, the Legend of Bix music that he had, and then some really rather unusual things. And in 2014, he gave that to me, and I kind of sat on it for way too long. And in 2014, I decided to put together a group just to read this music. So we did that for quite a long time, and just kind of got acquainted to the history of what it was. And that's what launched our all three albums, working with Dee, and then subsequently working with Paul. So that kind of got things going.
So let's talk about the origin of the Bowie Project and how why Bowie? That's the question. Now, I was at your release party over at Studebaker, incredible, and I did do one of the Bowie tracks there, and it was just kind of haunting, actually. And I had never heard that track by David Bowie. So, Paul, what kind of brought you into the David Bowie music? And then how did the collaboration happen between the Metropolitan Jazz Octet and you?
Well, I always was peripherally a David Bowie fan. I think you have to at least acknowledge his existence because it was so large looming. But to say that I ever really delved into the specifics of his artistry, I didn't until the end, until Black Star came out. When that album came out, it was it was his 69th birthday. 2 days later, he died. So just buzz around Black Star and, kind of his masterpiece, and then he died. So I really, at that point in my life, I really delved into that album quite deeply, and it just kind of stuck with me. And then started realizing I haven't paid enough attention to him because there's that belief that it just falls outside of my specific genre, and I hadn't been paying attention as a musician to things that typically I would not approach as an artist myself. But I really went back and figured out who he was, or as best as you could. And I found a song at that time from his Heathen album, 515. And immediately I sent it to Mike Alamana and I said, "This song speaks to me. You might think I'm crazy, but I want to do this song. I want to perform it." It was the political turmoil that the country was going through, personal turmoil. The wonderful thing about much of Bowie is you can't quite put your finger on exactly what he's trying to say, yet the message resonates. There's a message that usually resonates. And I found that with a lot of his lyrics, specifically that song. So I had started this kind of deep dive into Bowie and found more and more things that I thought, we had done 515. We did it live at Winters. And I had, at that point, it was Rose Colella and Alyssa Allgood singing backup. Mm-hmm. And, realized how powerful it was and the fact that it did work. And it excited me, kind of stepping outside of what I had typically been doing. And in the back of my mind, I thought, would it be weird if I started doing more of the Bowie material, but didn't want to start putting Bowie sets together. I wasn't ready for that.
Right.
Around the same time, Jim and I think it was Jim and John Cornegay, a few of the guys from MJO came to see me at Hey Nani. And I was kind of just in a place. I had been sick the year before. It was 2019, was this great comeback year for me. And I just was really looking for something different. So when those guys approached me to do a project, I immediately thought, oh, that would be amazing. I was a big fan of the group, of the album they had just done with D.
Yeah.
But immediately I thought, there, as I get often, I wondered if they probably want me to do a Sinatra thing, because they had just done Billie Holiday. It would have seemed logical. And I really didn't want to do that for many reasons. But Jim immediately said, oh, no, we kind of want to think a little bit outside of the box on this one. So we went back and forth. We had different ideas with composers. We threw back and forth, whether it would be one composer or different. And I don't know how long we did that. Maybe you remember, Jim, but it was a little while, maybe a couple of weeks or so. And I remember Jim saying, give me, even if you don't think it might be something that would work, give me the craziest idea in your head. And I just said, David Bowie. And we thought about it. And I said, let's get a list together. What's the harm in that? And I think we both were we went into it with a little bit of trepidation. I think we all agreed, which was wonderful for me, that if it wasn't working, we could pull the plug and rethink this. But and I think we all agreed too that we didn't want to force the music to be something it wasn't supposed to be. We didn't want to force it into being, hey, this is jazz, or make anything swing that shouldn't. So we were pretty quickly, almost immediately, all basically on the same page about what we wanted it to be. And that was helpful for me, because it's a bit daunting to take on an artist such as David Bowie. The persona is huge, the artistry is huge, his chameleon-like reconfigurations of what he was. You could, if you're not careful, you could really set yourself up for embarrassing yourself if it's not done properly. And I obviously didn't want to do that, and neither did the guys. But we found enough songs that really we thought would work.
The repertoire, obviously, that David Bowie has is massive. But then for you guys to have to go back through and figure out what would work with this, this whole setting. I mean, it's just like, who would even think about this?
Right.
And I'm sure Jim probably put the phone down when you said David Bowie. And said, no, I don't want to go that far out of the box here. Just hang on a second. But it's interesting, because I don't think anybody has ever done anything with David Bowie music in the past. Not even like this, but just mixing it into another genre as far as jazz, and doing an entire thing, doing an entire album of it. So Jim, when you started listening to it, because listening to the recording, unless I go back and compare and contrast, I can't tell you what's what. But it all seems to work really well within the context of the ensemble and how it's arranged. And was the arrangement part one of the keys to this entire project?
It's definitely one of the aspects of how to present this music. In thinking about, I remember having a discussion with Paul, like, what do we want to do? First and foremost, it has to fit what Paul wants to say. It has to fit his voice. It has to fit, how he sings, and definitely we're all reinventing what we did, as artists for this project to make it work. But that was the first order of context, figuring out what works for Paul. And then secondly, which David Bowie tracks resonate, and what Paul alluded to about the time in which we were doing this, the turmoil, though that played a large part into picking out which songs meant something to us in terms of what's going on in the current state of the world. The other thing is when we were picking Bowie songs, the things that attracted me to a particular song is how we could adapt them. Certain songs just wouldn't work as an adaptation because they were too steeped in rock, too steeped in certain elements that wouldn't translate into a particular into a genre that we were going to embrace. So a lot of that had to do with chord structure. Sometimes Bowie would do things harmonically that were just like so exotic and beautiful that I wanted to grab onto it and see what we could do with it. Those aspects were important to me because I could sort of project like what an arrangement would sound like taking this song. And admittedly, when we were choosing the initial 5 songs, we were shy about picking what really well-known Bowie songs. But eventually, as we sort of gained confidence in the arranging and how things were sounding, we became more comfortable with choosing some of the hits like Changes, Space Oddity, Let's Dance, some of the things that were really well known in Bowie's his discography and his songbook. But yeah, moving it over to a group like Metropolitan Jazz Octet was a careful process. Because as Paul said, some of these things would sound ridiculous if you had like a swing thing happening behind it. Yeah. So we were very careful and very aware that you're skating an edge between what works, what doesn't work. And for me, when I'm arranging and considering music, outside of the immediate what's good for Paul, what's good for the band, I put myself in the position of the listener, the audience. Like, what are they going to get from this? Are they going to hear it? So you never know how people are going to react. There are a lot of people who are purists, who will reject things just because they're not pure. Right. But then there's the open-minded listener who will kind of, like you were saying, you listen to a track and you're kind of going, this is a Bowie song, but it's not the first thing that hits you that this is a Bowie song. First thing that hits you is like, this is music, and here I hear this melody, I hear the arrangement, I hear the sound of the band. What's cool about this record is there's plenty of improvisation too for each track. There's somebody's taking a solo, and there's ensemble things, there's solo things that you would expect from an orchestration or an arrangement that incorporates jazz.
Did you have to talk to the octet? Did you have to talk to the band and say, okay, this is what we're planning on doing? And did they immediately look at you like, what? Or were they all in? Because I know some of the guys in the band, and they're killing players, but I can see some of them raising a little eyebrow and saying, are you sure this is what we should be doing with this group?
Well, I gotta say, they were all down for it. I think coming off of the D thing and having that great experience, everybody in the band is a very open-minded performers and musicians, but they were very curious. I will say they were curious what it was going to be like. And but once we got our first track recorded, I think it was Slow Burn was the first thing we actually recorded. They were all in. They were all in. Yeah.
Paul, what was it like? Everybody's heard you sing. Well, I don't know if everybody has, but a lot of people watching this have heard you sing, and you have a certain style and stuff. But did you have to change your style a little bit, or kind of reconceptualize what you were doing when you're singing these Bowie tunes? Because it's just not that you couldn't do it, and it sounds great, but it's different. Like a mind shift.
It was more rather than technique or anything like that, a change in technique. It was more a mindset.
Yeah.
And as I said, it was daunting at first. Having felt that what we did as a standalone for 515, having had just done that, I knew that there was an in. I didn't know whether it would work across the board, but I knew that I can do a David Bowie song, and I felt good about it. So that was good timing. Picking the songs, like you said earlier, it's a massive catalog, and every period is different. Picking that was challenging, but not for me. It wasn't as challenging as one might think, because I connected to these songs the same way I connect to any other song, whether it's Cole Porter or Harold Arlen or Duke Ellington. It's the story.
Yeah.
If I can't somehow put myself into the story or wrap my head around what the story is about, and how to interpret that, I don't know what to do with it. I love Ziggy. There it is, Ziggy Stardust. I'm not going to sing Ziggy Stardust. That wouldn't work. There's just great Bowie material that it's just an instant. No, I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah.
So it really was about the lyric for me, and feeling like where I can put myself and how I like to interpret songs into it. But as far as changing, I don't feel it was a stretch. I feel that it caused some growth. But to say that I had to reconfigure all of my approach, I didn't. But that also speaks to the talent of the arrangers and the talent of the group, because they wrote with that in mind. And it was very clear from the first two songs that it kind of showed us that, oh, this is going to work.
Yeah.
And what I love about what the album became, and this is not something we thought about from the start, is it's not just a collection of David Bowie songs. If you didn't know that the songs were all written by Bowie, it plays as an album. It plays as a concept album. There are a lot of themes that we just found reoccurring. I don't think there's anything on the album that doesn't quite fit as a different concept. They're all Bowie songs, but there's a cohesive album there as well. And I love that. I love that we found that.
So let's talk about this. I should tell everybody it's on Origin Records, so origin.com, and that's where you can pick it up. And it is live now, right? So it's out there now, but your new release show is February 10th at Studio 5. That's Studio 5, 1938 Dempster, right there in Evanston. Beautiful spot, studio5.dance, 7:30 p.m. on February 10th. So let's talk a little bit about the audience, because the jazz audience in Chicago knows Jim, knows Paul, knows me. And so if they're coming out, they're going to come to this, and let's say, maybe they've never heard David Bowie, or, their kids might have listened to David Bowie at a certain point and they told them to turn it down and get out of the house or something. So let's just kind of tell everybody, why would they want to come out? I think, Paul, you sort of answered that, is that you're coming out not for the David Bowie aspect, but to hear the arrangements and all that, but listen to the lyric, listen to the stories behind these tunes.
Absolutely.
Fair to say?
Absolutely. I think I can't imagine that anyone who's open-minded to hearing material, if they're not familiar with David Bowie, I can't imagine that they would hear anything that would be so shocking to them or so foreign. I believe there's an in. They're just stories. We're telling stories. They're beautiful arrangements. They're beautiful playing. And I think those who do know David Bowie, and maybe David Bowie is sacred to them, I think if they're open, they're going to appreciate that we are honoring this music. We're not bastardizing it. We're not trying to pull it away from him. We're celebrating that he was a damn good songwriter. And check this out. We're in no way trying to imitate. There's not a hint of imitation on any of it. And that was important for all of us. So I think if they're open-minded, it can reach both audiences.
Jim, so since this is the Metropolitan Jazz Octet, how did you approach Origin to pick this up? Because, I know they're a jazz record label, and fairly traditional, but they do put out a lot of different things. But, it seems like, to me, just so everybody knows, to me, listening to this recording down and, the whole concept behind it, I think it's only going to open up the jazz audience, to open up them to the David Bowie music, but also open up people that might not listen to jazz or anything on a regular basis, casual music fans, and open them up to the David Bowie music, because it's the story, it's the lyric, and it's the overall orchestration that happens on this recording. I think it's fantastic. I think you're bringing a lot of different audiences, but to put it out on Origin, was there a discussion you had to have with them and kind of work through it?
Well, it's funny, the whole landscape of putting out music and labels and streaming, and it's changing as we speak. It's hard to really pin down how that is at any one point in time. So it was, things had changed drastically since we worked with Dee on that previous record, which is on Delmark, and that was an interesting and a really good partnership with Delmark.
Yeah.
We weren't against being on Delmark, but we just, I actually have a relationship. I've got a record on Origin already, and they have a couple different divisions of their label. They have, I guess, Origin Records. They have Origin Classical, and I think there's an AO2 Records, which I'm not sure of that distinction. But I've already been familiar with the company and their and the kind of music they have on there. And I reached out to John Bishop, who's in charge of the label, and I said, I've got this idea, I've got this music, can I send it to you? And he goes, yeah. So I sent it. He goes, yeah, this is great. This is exactly what we want. The kind of level of writing and performing we want. And he's actually loved the fact that it was sort of a departure. I don't want to say departure, but it was unusual for the label. I think they were ready to do something that sort of like crossed some boundaries, was outside of the boxes. The other thing I love about Origin is you look at any artist, any record on there, and it's really high level music. It's very thoughtful, beautifully played, beautifully written music, and it seemed like a good home for us. And I like how they do business too. Yeah. They take care of business. They do a lot of promotion for their artists. The website is spectacular. It looks great, and you can always release something on your own and do all that work and do all that. Bottom line is, I'm a musician. I'm a composer. I'm an arranger. The business of being a label is not something I want to take on. I'd rather leave it to the experts, and I really appreciated Origin, so that it was a good fit.
Yeah. Well, that's great. All right. So the Bowie Project, the Metropolitan Jazz Octet featuring Paul Marinaro, Friday, February 10th, Studio 5, 7:30 p.m. is the release show. 1938 Dempster right there in Evanston, studio5.dance. And then, of course, I want to send everybody over to the Metropolitan Jazz Octet.com for all the information on that group and that ensemble and all the past performances and all the past recordings. And then, of course, paulmarinaro.com. You've got this recent recording out, not quite yet. And now you have this one coming out. And I think when we talked on the last one, you might have like 7 or 8 more coming out before June. So.
We're gonna see. But yeah, these were recorded simultaneously, so it was kind of wearing two different creative hats. It was a great problem to have.
Yeah, well, congratulations to both of you guys, man. It is quite. It was quite an undertaking, because listening to it, I know the undertaking that it must have been, but the final product you guys have to be completely excited about, and I'm sure everybody's going to totally enjoy hearing it recorded, but also go see it live, because I'm curious to hear it live as well. That's going to be something special, especially in that space. So, and
Jim will be wearing the Ziggy Stardust costume.
Oh, yeah.
I lost the flip on that, so I'm going to be the thin white dude.
But you're going to start the show coming out of a space space shuttle, right? Or something? Not a smoke. Okay.
Yeah.
For the stage show, people should just come for the stage show, if nothing else. That's going to be
absolutely. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate it, as usual. And thank you all for watching. As always, all the information is going to be on chicagojazz.com. It's also linked up below. And until next time, hopefully I will see you all somewhere out on the scene.